Welcome to Mirage. I'm Brian Aiello. Today we're going to be speculating on Ray Bradbury. And joining me is Matthew Bin. He is a speculative author, and his book, Brandon's Way, is available on Amazon. How are you doing? You're in Detroit.
I am. My first time in Detroit, to be honest.
What do you think of it?
Well, I'm kind of in the suburbs here, so the Benihana next door looks nice, the Taco Bell next door looks nice, but, you know. But it's a really good con. I'm really enjoying myself so far.
Oh, fantastic. So you're doing some panels.
Yes.
I was just looking at what your panels were called. They're fascinating titles. You want to go into it a little bit before we jump into Ray Bradbury?
For sure. This morning I did a panel on pacifism, which went really, really well. We had a full house, which is always good when you have a philosophical panel. And it was 10 in the morning, too, so I was impressed that people were up. And we talked about pacifism and how it plays out in various science fiction properties, and how it plays out in our own work, and how it plays out in society, which is really good to hear. It was like a really good discussion.
I would have loved to have gone to that. It sounds fascinating.
It was great.
Did Ray Bradbury come up in that discussion at all?
He didn't. I tried to shoehorn it in. I didn't get the chance.
And then you had one other panel.
Tomorrow morning is my next panel. And
okay.
Yeah, and it's called The Cake is a Lie. It's about moving the goalposts to kind of make our characters hate life more, I guess. So I don't know how that one's going to go. It'll be interesting for sure.
No, that is interesting. It's kind of like life, though, isn't it? Once you accomplish something, you notice that there's something else to accomplish yet.
Exactly.
It's very fascinating. Yeah. So Ray Bradbury died in 2012.
Yes.
And that is fascinating to me that, even Obama said something. I do not remember his death. And that was just 6 years ago. Yeah. And his impact on me, Fahrenheit 451, is required reading in high school. I think like sophomore English or something along those lines. So, I mean, that's my experience. I saw the movie. I've seen that a number of times. But he is one of your favorites.
Yeah, and Fahrenheit 451 actually, it was assigned, and I had already read some Bradbury at this point, but it was assigned to my class in grade 8. And I don't like in the school board I went to, you had elementary school was kindergarten to grade 8, and then you had high school grade 9 to 13. And so we were kind of like young to be assigned this, I think. And I inhaled it. I read it overnight. And to the point where my teacher was not truly believing that I'd actually read it, but that was the kind of nerdy kid I was, right? And I absolutely loved the book. And it's funny because I went back and read it again a few years ago, like a couple of years ago, thinking I'm not going to love this book as much. I absolutely love it. It has worn so well. It still says so much. And I was really pleased to find out that I was still in love with the book, because not all my childhood reads have that same quality.
Why did it resonate with you?
Because it's talking about themes that that are still incredibly important, and probably more important the more our mass communications are dictating the way we think, which I think is absolutely the case. I think that's one of our biggest problems in North America, is that mass communications are leading the narrative, and we don't have the ability to sit back and consider, and we don't have that space in our heads for literature. And I think literature is the antidote. Literature is what makes us think better. And Ray Bradbury said, people keep asking me to tell them what the future is going to be. I'm trying to prevent the future. That was his position as a science fiction author. And that's what he was trying to do, was trying to not let Fahrenheit 451 become a thing. And it absolutely has. I think he was absolutely prescient.
Which is interesting if you think about it, because every single thing that you want to read is available for you for free in a lot of cases, or like extremely discounted prices. And our society doesn't seem to be kind of turning its, I mean, you can individually decide that you're not going to read something because somebody told you not to, but in terms of, people breaking into your house and taking these books because they are, evil or whatnot, and then burning them in your front yard, or removing them from the internet or the libraries, I don't think that's happening. Do you?
No, but I don't think book burning was what it was really about. That was a story that was the frame that he put the story on. But what he was talking about was anti-intellectualism, I'm pretty sure. It was about a society that rejected books as a means of a medium for our culture. And once you reject the written word, or once you reject literature, and I don't even think books are the focus. I think it's the idea of contemplated thought about who we are and what we're doing. Once you take away that, you get this sort of 24-hour sound bit or soundbite headline of the moment culture, which is unfortunately, I think, what we're moving towards.
No, I think that's true as well, because when you have like a YouTube environment where your entertainment lasts for 5 minutes and then something else starts, it's even worse than it was when we were growing up, in the 90s or whatever, where we had 30 minutes of entertainment and then something else started. We had commercials interceding that, and now you really don't have to strive to digest what you're ingesting. I mean, it just washes over you in some kind of mindless manner. So I mean, what is this a theme or his work?
I wouldn't say so. I think he had a 69-year publishing career, I think. And this guy was a writer's writer. He rented time in LA at the library on the typewriter. Like I understand he had to put in like a quarter per hour or a dime every hour.
Yeah, 10 cents, man. That's crazy. Yeah. It cost him $9.80 to actually write Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah, and I mean, aren't we all trying to be that guy, as writers? I mean, that's fantastic. But I mean, he wrote so widely, and I certainly don't have a handle on his entire I've got a short Bradbury bookshelf compared to his actual publishing, but so many of his stories also, were very focal for me growing up. And again, when I go back to them, they really do wear so well. But I think he was looking at a lot of different parts of the human condition and how we move forward in this technological age. I think there is a story of his called The Veldt. It was published under another name, then it was published as part of his collection, The Illustrated Man, which, if you're looking to get into Bradbury, The Illustrated Man is a fantastic short story collection to get into. But in that, he was talking about a technological house and how, this sort of generational issue where the kids understand and deal with the technology better than the parents, and how destructive that can be on the family. Now, in his story, it's destructive in the sense that the parents get eaten by a lion. But I think he's, making a wider point than, trying to say that everyone's going to be eaten by a lion. He's trying to say that technology itself is a danger. Mm-hmm. And everything is, again, it's like anything else. It's a tool or it's a weapon. It can be either. But it's important for us to stand and look at technology objectively and say, what are we doing with this? Is this okay?
Yeah, it's very interesting because he was a prolific short fiction writer. He wrote 600 pieces of short fiction. He wrote 27 novels. But if you're going to get into Ray Bradbury, what he did during his life was allow them to be formed into radio shows and television shows and actual movies that you would have, the option of sitting through. Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Because he was not constrained by any particular a medium, and I think he was quite progressive in that way.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to look to see what kind of he has 96 writing credits. That means 96 pieces of his work were formed into some kind of mass media environment. I mean, just going into, you could find him and just let it kind of wash over you. And in terms of his novels, 27, Fahrenheit 451 being one of the biggest. Can you think of another novel that kind of did that?
For him, no. The books of his that really resonated with me were Fahrenheit 451, The Illustrated Man, and The Martian Chronicles. And again, the Martian Chronicles are so worth getting into.
Oh yeah, but that's a short story collection, right? And that was his first printed book.
Yeah, and it's a short story collection, but it's a very connected short story collection. There's a purpose to it more than just each story by story. It's not like a collection. It's more like a designed set of short stories.
What's fascinating about that? I was reading how he was trying to get those stories published individually in New York. I guess he's from Los Angeles or California. Yeah. So he took a bus. Oh man, I've been on a bus from Dallas to Florida. It was the most miserable 2 days of my life. And he took a bus from Los Angeles to New York, which has got to be like 4 days worth of, hell. And got off the bus, went into a YMCA, spent 50 cents a night, and he would walk around the city trying to get his short fiction published and failed miserably, right? I mean, he couldn't get a single story published in any of these magazines. I mean, this is kind of like one of those miraculous moments in a person's life. He just happened upon an editor with the same last name as his. They had dinner, and the guy said, "Well, what are you trying to do?" And he said, "Oh, I have these stories I want to publish." Well, how about you group them together? So he went back to the YMCA and he wrote an outline, and the next day he was paid $750 for his Martian Chronicles. He
Wow.
went home and grouped them together and sent it to the guy, and then a literary career was born. I mean, he was going to give up. He was going to go home. Who knows what would have happened at that point, right? I mean, he failed. That was like his one shot. I'm going to sell these pieces of short fiction. He goes, fails miserably. At the last minute, somebody saves him, and the world is better off for it, right? I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, though, I kind of feel pretty strongly that his was the kind of voice that was going to get out one way or another. It's good that he got the success when he did, but this was not a guy who was going to be satisfied with not saying what he had to say. And that's, again, why I come back to his work, is that he has so much to say. And he's fascinating. He's absolutely fascinating.
That's like a lot of us, though, isn't it, in terms of writing? Because, I mean, nobody's going to tell us, no, you're not good enough. We're just going to sit down and write another story anyway.
Yeah.
We're not looking for them to say we're good. We're looking for the next story. We're looking for the end. And maybe that's what you said earlier, Ray Bradbury is a writer's writer.
Yeah.
Go into it a little bit more about the technology aspects in terms of, I think I interrupted you in the middle of what you were saying and totally went on a totally different path. You were talking about technology and Bradbury's work, I believe.
Yeah, and I think he was self-consciously a science fiction writer in a time when there weren't a lot of science fiction writers. He is a golden age writer, and I think that made him quite conscious of the fact that, I mean, he was in a technological age. He was writing through, the dawn of mass communications, of mass or high-speed travel, of the nuclear age. He was in all those things, and his greatest works were all in the early 50s to late 50s, I think. And I mean, the technological change then was massive. I think he was very conscious of that, and I kind of see him in the same way I see Franz Kafka, that they're trying to grapple with how technology is changing people. And there's a passage in Fahrenheit 451. Again, it's about burning books, but really the main character gets part of this little sort of secret society, and what they're doing is committing passages of literature to memory. And there's an amazing sequence in there where Guy Montag, the main character, gets on a bus and he's trying to save in his mind a passage from the Bible. Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin. And it's getting messed up with an advertising jingle that's also playing on the bus, right? And it's this kind of modern world situation that Bradbury was so good at putting together. And that's where I see he's not hard science, technology, HAL 9000 kind of person. But
he's not putting any facts behind his science.
And he was I think he readily admitted that. But what he's trying to do is say, where's our society going with this? What are we doing with this as a society? And I think this is a much more important question. And that sequence on the bus with the advertising jingle is such a perfect modern conundrum, as for guys who are trying to write, who are trying to create. It's amazing to see that played out in a scene where we're fucked over by technology, we're screwed up by
and we're screwed up by other mass media. And while you were talking, I was thinking about A Christmas Carol from Dickens. And if you ask a kid from the 80s, tell me about the Christmas Carol, they're going to tell you about Mickey Mouse, you know what I mean? Or they're going to tell you about something else ridiculous, not from the original author, Dickens. And that's kind of what this is happening, with this character. He's on this bus, he's trying to, memorize this verse from the King James Bible, which in itself is a classic piece of literature, and it's getting messed up with a modern kind of through line, and just fascinating. It really is.
Yeah, And it kind of shows. I think this goes back to what I was saying about the, the where he was going on the modern world and the soundbite culture and so on. Because the advertising jingle is so ephemeral and so pointless and so like it's a moment at most. It's at best a T-shirt, right?
It's not going to live forever.
Right, but it is. We are struggling to keep a literature and a passage of literature. Consider the lilies of the field. That is so timeless. It's a beautiful passage, and I'm not a religious person, but I can recognize beautiful literature when I see it, and that biblical passage is absolutely wonderful.
I mean, it was written at the same time as Shakespeare, potentially by Shakespeare or people who are influenced by Shakespeare. So, I mean, it has that kind of language to it.
Exactly, exactly. But I mean, there's a good point. I mean, Shakespeare's the kind of thing that is threatened by a culture that won't sit down for 2 hours and think about meaningfully think through a play or a piece of literature like Shakespeare wrote. And I'm sorry, you can't get Shakespeare on the surface. There's way too much going on. You need to dig in. You need to apply some mental energy, and there's not a lot of room to do that anymore. We've struggled with that.
Well, we're truncating stuff too, aren't we? And we're adapting it, and we're changing it around, and we're making it work for the modern era. And it's no longer, I mean, Shakespeare is a kind of good example of that, because going, from what he originally put on the stage, which was rough. I mean, he threw things up so he can make money, so he could feed himself and put a roof over his head. And then after he died, or before he died, they put the first folio together, and he had nothing to do with that. You know what I mean? Somebody else did it, attached his name to it. And then from, the 16th century on, constant editors are messing with it and changing it and forming it better and making it better and putting quotes in it and adapting it to whatever language usage is currently in vogue. And then what do you have? You have modern Shakespeare. Is it the same as that dude back in 15 whatever who put Romeo and Juliet on stage? He wasn't trying to tell classic literature. He was just trying to tell a story, make a buck.
Yeah, but I mean, the story is one thing, but there's a lot more. Like each line of Shakespeare is so dense with meaning and with whether it's whether it's a thought on the human condition or it's a fart joke. Both are possible here. And there's a lot to do, right? And we can't both have a culture that is obsessed with a one-liner, with a T-shirt slogan, with a meme, with a tweet, and also have a culture that is going to expend meaningful time and energy figuring out and making sense of people like Shakespeare. And I think that's where Bradbury was going, and that's where technology is a problem. It's probably as bad now, or much worse now, than it was with when Bradbury was writing that.
No, totally. I mean, we have so much more kind of being flooded at us, I mean, it's very interesting because, I mean, that's obviously why he's still existing. Now they're putting an HBO series together with Fahrenheit 451 as the, as the main idea. And I wonder, Fahrenheit 451, how big of a novel was that?
It's not a big novel. It's actually quite a short novel. I don't know if it's like 50,000 words or something. It's not. It's almost novella length, and it's quite dense. It's a good story, but it's there's a lot going on there. I had forgotten when I read it, when I came back to it as an adult after reading it multiple times as a teenager. I had forgotten that it ends with war starting. The country is descending into war, and it's a really scary novel. But it is quite short.
And now it's being turned into this probably multi-seasonal, television show.
Well, there was I apologize to your younger listeners who will not know of this, but back in my day, in the 1980s, we had this thing called text adventures because computers weren't good enough to give us graphic adventures, and there was a Fahrenheit 451 text adventure game that came out, which I devoured. I played it a lot on my Atari ST, and Ray Bradbury was involved in it, and it is actually post novel stuff. It's like it's in the world of Fahrenheit 451, but it's after the novel ends. So I think there's a lot to do with that, and but I'm not sure. I'm not endorsing the HBO miniseries or series or whatever it's going to be. I will watch it, but I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what that's going to be. Whether or not it's a mini series or a series. Let's see if I can pull something up on that. Um, he's a fascinating guy in terms of kind of following along with the technology. Before
Yeah.
we got on this podcast, I was watching The Electric Body. What was I watching? I don't even think that's the title of it. My brain, man, it's like
The Body
completely.
Electric.
Yeah, The Body Electric, the Twilight Zone series. It was like the 100th episode. It was a Ray Bradbury story. And he just kind of floated in and out of the modern zeitgeist. His name never disappeared. How do you get a book into the educational curriculum? That was my main thought the other day. I was like, this is a science fiction book. As an adult looking back on it, I was like, how come you weren't more excited by that book? Should have eaten that thing up.
Yeah,
Instead, it was kind of like, exactly right. Instead, it was kind of like, oh no, you want me to read Fahrenheit 451? It was a good book, right? But it never kind of lived with me. It was kind of, unfortunately, I mean, the movie was horrible.
Yeah, and I honestly, the most of the adaptations of Bradbury for the screen are not. There was a lot done in the '60s, and I think they were kind of thirsty for popular content like that, and they weren't great. I'll be quite honest. Although the first Bradbury that I encountered, I believe, was this short story that I mentioned, "The Veldt," which is about the automatic technological house, and it's a really good short story, and it was made into a short film that for some reason they thought that was appropriate content to play for like 12-year-olds in my school. Again, probably starved for content. Maybe this film reel just kind of made its way to my school, and so I don't know how many people thought, but it's really worth going back and finding. It's a great adaptation of it.
What do you think the point of putting that book into the education curriculum is? What are they trying to
Well,
get across? I mean, obviously he's lived throughout, but he's writing, like you said, in the golden age of science fiction writers. He probably his contemporaries are Heinlein and
Asimov.
Asimov. I think you'd put Asimov on a different tier, though, wouldn't you? Or he's like the god of science fiction writing in this age.
He only predates Bradbury by a small amount, and I think Asimov and Bradbury, for me, they're on the same level, to be
Oh,
honest.
really? 'Cause Asimov
Yeah.
to me, God, I love Asimov. I love his work so much. I could read one of his stories and just like sink into the ideas behind it, and they just really work for me very well. But the question is, why do you think they put a Ray Bradbury story in the education curriculum? What?
There's a few good reasons for it. Number one, it's short, so it's easy. It's like manageable for a non-reader high school kid, like a 14, 15-year-old. This is manageable content. It doesn't have a lot of swearing or sexuality in it. There's a little bit of sexuality, I think, but not very much. But I think the most important thing is there's very strong themes. And this is one of the ways that genre writers, I think, are so valuable, is that they paint with really thick lines sometimes. And that doesn't, I'm not
Yeah.
running it down at all.
No, I know.
I think you come away from that book with clear ideas about what Bradbury meant. And I will also say that, like a lot of literature, I don't think it's fully understood. I think that because we talk about book burning is what Fahrenheit 451 is about. Of course, that's the title and that's the frame of it, but that's not what it's really about. It's really, I think, about anti-intellectualism. But we can talk about it with kids, with younger
Questioning
people.
authority too, right? I mean,
Sure.
question authority.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. It's hard for me to judge because I was such a fan of this book as a kid. I was making models of the truck that they rode around in to burn things down, burn the books down and stuff. Like I was quite obsessed with this book. But I think that any kid could dip into this book and come away with some ideas that make a lot of sense and that are still relevant to the modern world. I don't think there's any way that this book, and again, that's where I was so fascinated with it when I came back to it in my 30s, having not read it for 15 years, maybe 20, 12 years, it was still that good a book, and doing a couple of English degrees, you lose a lot of respect for a lot of stuff you liked as a kid. But that book still, to me, is a great piece of literature, and it's very safe to bring to kids in that way.
Eli Wiesel was another one of those books that I love that one so much. That was one I read in a night. It's very short. The guy who survives the Nazi concentration camp. But it does kind of go hand in hand with Fahrenheit 451. It's an anti-fascist book, right? It's about choice. It's about fighting back. It's about, striving through adversity, I think.
Yeah. And I would put Bradbury in the same place I'd put like Aldous Huxley in Brave New World. Like Fahrenheit 451, there is a fascist element to it in the fact that there's a state-sponsored destruction of literature campaign, right? And I mean, book burnings were unquestionably they're emotional, they are evocative. In the 50s, that was recalling newsreels of the 30s with Nazis burning books. So that was a meaningful choice. But in the book, there's Guy Montag's wife, who she likes this idea that we should be listening to the radio and watching our giant TV walls. Like in the same way in Brave New World, it wasn't about the state. It wasn't like a Big Brother future. It was the state is going to keep you entertained and high so that you don't have to think about things, and then the state can go on and do what it wants. And I think that's where Fahrenheit 451 was, and that's a much harder shell to break out of as a dissident, as a revolutionary. It's hard to break out of a nice soft puffy bubble than it is to break out of a hard shell like a 1984 Big Brother scenario.
Yeah, that's a great book too. God, that's such a good book. And that's a harder book to read. I think that's more of a complex read than a Fahrenheit 451. I mean,
absolutely.
They still have books in 1984. They're just being produced by computers. They're being automated.
Within his type, where it's a very controlled language. I always found Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451 to be much scarier because it's not the state telling you what to do. It's people deciding that the easier way is the better way, and that's where literature is. That's what literature is fighting against, is complacency and acceptance. Literature is about upsetting us. Arts are about upsetting us and making us uncomfortable, and I think that to me is a scarier prospect, because I'm very susceptible, as we all are. We're all susceptible to enjoying ourselves and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to sit down and watch some mindless TV. That's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to have a couple beers and dull the sensations a little bit, because I'd rather just sit and laugh at something stupid. And we end up with Idiocracy if we want to go the funny route, or Brave New World or Fahrenheit 451 if we want to go, this is us, euthanizing ourselves.
I mean, yeah, what does it suggest? That life is short, make it as unpainful as possible, or as less painful as possible.
Yeah.
Heroin, anesthetize yourself. I mean, there's just why put yourself against the cheese grater? I mean, my brain's not working, but I mean, why make your life painful?
Exactly. And the fact is, there's a lot of stuff going on that is painful to contemplate and painful to confront. And, the timeline we're living in is possibly the worst timeline right now. It's been a tough year for a lot of us on this radical left or center left or not crazy side of the spectrum. And it would be nice to just, as you say, anesthetize ourselves and just kind of sit back and not worry about it. But I don't think that's the solution. And I think that's what people like Bradbury were saying, was it's very easy for us to take that easy route, that comfortable route, but that's not the way things are supposed to go.
It's interesting because this is directly after World War II, just after one of the worst genocides in the history of mankind. I mean, that we know, that's been recorded down. I mean, maybe you can say Genghis Khan did a lot worse. But you have that old saying where they came for my neighbor and I didn't say anything, and then they came for my landlord and I didn't say anything, and and they came for me, I had nobody to go to for help, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
it's kind of like keep your mouth shut and status quo city until you're in a concentration camp breaking big rocks in the little rocks. No other reason besides the fact that you're a different ethnicity, or you're a criminal, or you're gay, or you're a gypsy, or whatever have you.
Or you have the wrong.
You like to read books. Yeah, or you like reading books. I mean, yeah, you can put any.
And here's the thing. I think it's a really relevant point you bring up, and I think it's significant. The thing that makes the Nazi genocide different from everything that came before it? And it doesn't matter the numbers. I'm sorry, I'm not at all dismissing the numbers, but I'm not saying, I don't think it's worth comparing this many millions died under this person and this many millions died under this person. It's very important that 12 million people, like, we don't lose sight of the fact that 12 million individual lives were snuffed out under the Nazis. But the difference between every other genocide before it and the Nazi genocide, the Holocaust, was industrialized. And that is, I think that strikes to the core of what Bradbury is saying and what a lot of the science fiction writers who are grappling with technology were saying. This was an industrialized, modern, technological death sequence, like a death camp, the death factory. The idea that the Germans, the Nazis, were looking for the most efficient way to kill the most people they could. My God, what have we become as a species? It's not okay, And I think you're absolutely right to put it in that context. And anybody who lived through that has to think about technology in a totally different way. You and I grew up in a time when technology was Star Wars, right? Technology was good and cool. We could not have lived that time. That couldn't have existed.
Well, we lived a time where we had this thing, kind of a babysitter called the nuclear bomb, keeping everybody in check.
Yes.
We had it, the Russians had it, the Chinese had it, everybody else started getting it. They're like, well, hey, you launch a nuclear bomb, I'm going to launch a nuclear bomb. And we had this Cold War that lasted for 50 or 60 years where nobody wanted to be bombed into oblivion. I mean, decimated or destroyed completely or whatever have you. And
yeah. I mean, it was an existential threat for the planet, which was, again, a good thing.
It's interesting because without that nuclear bomb, what would we have actually done? Because he's coming into this. Did he go to war? Is he a soldier?
I don't believe he did.
He would have been perfect age, but why didn't he go to soldier? Or why didn't he go to war?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. But I mean, it does raise why he and everyone in his era, in that 1950s golden age of science fiction, why they were confronting these questions. Because, like you say, there's the industrial holocaust, there's the nuclear threat, which was the first time we were able to destroy the planet. As a species, that was the first way we figured out to destroy the planet. Now we've gotten better at it. We can destroy it with our climate and stuff. We've really improved our game. But at that time, it was unthinkable. It was dealing with the unthinkable. And I come back to the fact that Bradbury and the people that were writing in his time had to have that in mind. That had to be a major issue for them in front and center for them.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. Let's see. I'm trying to look up Ray Bradbury. Did he go to war? I hate the internet sometimes, It has all this information, and then the one thing that you want is in the website that is not going to be very kind if you click on it. Answers.com. Have you ever clicked on that? You can't back out of it. It's so horrible. And then they say they have the answer. They say they do, and then you click on it, and it's like, nope. Anyway, so it's really interesting too. Industrialization. I mean, we had war industrialized in the beginning part of the 20th century.
Yep.
We killed people in an industrialized setting, and then the industrialized world is destroying itself.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity and now we're kind of removing humanity from the deindustrialization. And
yes.
I mean, what is the next step? I mean, this is nice that we have science fiction because we can kind of answer that question. What's next? I mean, I think Brandon's Way kind of answers that question too, doesn't it? In terms of what's next for humanity in this industrialized world that we have.
That was very much in my mind. That post environmental collapse, post the nationalism system that we've built over the last couple of 100 years. I don't think that's a permanent system. So when these things collapse, what's left? And I've always thought that the important human movement is away from this one planet. I think that is going to be the most important thing we do as a species, is go elsewhere. And I mean, we're not there yet, but probably the most significant thing we've done as a species is get to the moon. And that's only a small step, as they say. But it's true. And I like that you brought up this sort of post-humanity industrial world. So between AI and automation, we are getting away from all the things that we've known for a century and a half. That's a long time to, it's multiple generations that we're just kind of upsetting how we did things. So.
And it's really fascinating to me if you think about the fact that, the space around the Earth doesn't want us out there. It's deadly.
Right.
You can't breathe anything. It's a vacuum. You
Mm-hmm.
go to Mars, I mean, you're getting basically shot through with radiation. You go to Jupiter, same thing. I mean, these are not safe places.
No.
It's not like you go from North America to Europe and the only deadly thing is if you fall off the boat and drown or something along those lines, or your plane crashes in from the sky. I mean, outer space does not want you up there. It takes forever to go anywhere, and it's probably going to be deadly when you do. Scott Kelly spent like less than a year in space, and he came back, and I read his book. The first couple chapters talks about like how he felt his body like exploded with inflammation.
Oh, really?
He couldn't walk. His eyeballs were swollen. I mean, he's already had prostate cancer. I mean, whether or not that was caused by his experiences in space or not, we'll probably never know. But him and his brother both had prostate cancer. I mean, we're stuck here on a planet that potentially doesn't need us anymore. Who said that we're the sex organs of the machine, the industrial machine?
I like it.
All right, I love it. When I heard that, I was like, oh my God, we are really, because the machines do the work and we just press the buttons, and we need somebody to press the button so we have sex so our kid can press the button, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, why can't I find what Ray Bradbury did during World War II?
I gather he just was hanging around and writing in California, good for him.
But he was like 24 years old, though, at that point. Or he was in his 20s. Perfect age to go to war. Perfect age. So why didn't he?
All the better for him, I'd say. Because if he had and he died, we would have lost something.
Yeah, but Kurt Vonnegut went to war, and he almost died in the bombing at Dresden. And at the end of the day, we were blessed with these gorgeous stories that were based in reality. But I really want to know why he go to war, and I can't find it. It's horrible. The Velt. I found some flashcards here, some kind of quizzy stuff. Let me see if I can get.
So maybe it was considered an educational thing, the Velt. Maybe if you're seeing quiz stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. Well, actually, now it's the internet. The internet's lied to me again. I'm just really concerned with why I can't find out why Ray Bradbury was. And so, what are your other favorite Ray Bradbury stories? I mean,
well, we touched briefly on the Martian Chronicles, and I remember I was about 11 years old, and I was at a department store with my mother, and she was wandering around doing, getting what moms get, and I was sitting there in the book aisle, and they had like all these like real crappy, it was a crappy department store, and it was crappy discount books, and I got this very pulpy version of the Martian Chronicles, and my mom, I had the money for it. It was like $4 or something at the time. My mom said, oh no, I'll pay for it, because she was rewarding me for picking a book, and I devoured this thing, and it's so off the wall. There's no internal reality to it. It's like I said, it's a sequence of short stories. It's it's a set of short stories. Some of them are very realistic, some of them are just crazy, and I love it. I can really get into that myself. But he was playing with a lot of questions about what are we as a race, as a species, questions of colonialism and conquering other people, and I think he was thinking a lot about maybe the American Native experience, and what they thought of white conquerors coming to the continent. So it's a really fascinating set of stories, and it's another one that I really need to go back and reread again because it was so good. Definitely a great collection.
I want to read it too. Have they made that into a kind of media
They did in 1964 or something. They did a Martian Chronicles movie, and I have tried to watch it. I don't recall. Like, I remember trying to watch it. I got it off of YouTube or something a few years ago, and I tried to watch it, and it was unwatchable. I couldn't. I couldn't get through it because I think they're trying to make it. Short story collections don't make an easy movie, and they're trying to make a Hollywood thing out of it. I would advise against it, to be honest.
Gotcha. I found an answer. He was 4F because of his vision.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he did not serve. He was not like in prison or anything. Or, what's interesting about authors is you can never tell what the actual name of the person was either. So, I mean, potentially Ray Bradbury is a pen name, and the person who owned it went to war, and they would just never know about it. But no, in this case, it looks like he was 4F because of his vision problem. So, was he blind? I guess he had to have been.
See the big glasses that he wore. I think.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So that's the answer. He's blind-ish, and he didn't have to go to war. I mean, God, that's a hardship too on a guy. You know what I mean? There's 6 million people going to war, and you're one of the few that has to stay behind and hang out with all the, ladies or whatever. So the Martian Chronicles, my wife read it, and she did not enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah, she said it was a little bit too dry for her.
I could see that, and I think it is. There's an element of old sci-fi to it, but I mean, I'm a bad person to ask. Is this any good? Because I'm just so easy to. Bradbury pushes the buttons that are going to get me going. So
you like that stuff, right? You like that pulpy science fiction stuff.
Yeah.
Put a story in space, have nothing legitimate happening or no scientific backing, and you're all about it.
Yeah. Guilty as charged.
I want to write a Martian story with dinosaurs found on Mars, and that just popped in my head. I just want to do it. It doesn't make any sense, but there you go. You're landing on Mars. You don't have to have a helmet on because there's air, and all of a sudden there are dinosaurs eating red rock or something. I mean, it's interesting how things kind of progress from there. I mean, in the 1940s, nobody knew anything. Basically, we discovered the atom bomb. And then science became more of a reality. The 50s started happening. And then we went to space, and it's like, oh, man, there's actual rules to this thing. It's not just cheese up there on the moon. It's dust and dirt and whatever have you.
Yeah.
And Ray Bradbury, I mean, in terms of being valid, did he stop being valid? He didn't go to college. He wasn't an educated man. I mean, he kind of was self-educated, right? So when he's writing Fahrenheit 451 in 1953 and the Martian Chronicles before that, there's a dude who basically was making stuff up, and when it stopped being possible to do that, did he stop being valid?
I kind of worried that he did when I went back to him as an adult, and I don't think so. I think he was grappling with such important concepts and such important issues and such timeless issues that I don't think at all that he's lost validity. I think the reverse. He really stands out as somebody who was not just writing about his time, but was writing about a much bigger humanity, much bigger aspects of humanity.
He is credited as being a social commentator, the same as Heinlein too. Where both of them kind of their fiction's not fact-based. I mean, they made up a lot of stuff, a lot of fantasy and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Who's the guy who wrote Tarzan? I think he falls into that same category too.
Edgar Rice Burroughs. Yeah,
Burroughs. Kind of the same ballpark where they just kind of made it up as they went along. I mean, he has a Martian story too. What is it? God, what is it called?
It's a very mundane.
John Carter from Mars.
Yes,
John Carter from Mars. And it's kind of the same ballpark. I mean, I think he might be a little bit older than these guys, kind of in a way, but I mean, he's writing about a Confederate soldier that goes to Mars, and there's a whole kingdom up there. I love it, right? It's fantasy.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work, but he is kind of writing about this social thing that's happening. I mean, he's got a Confederate soldier going to an alien world. I mean, it is an alien world for a Confederate soldier or anybody that lived in the South during the Civil War. They kind of break out, and they can't own slaves anymore. If you're white, you're on the same kind of level as a black dude, and you're like, oh man, what happened to me being better than everybody?
Yeah,
it's very interesting, that social commentary.
Yeah,
and I guess he won the Medal of Freedom in 2004. Bush gave it to him. So I mean, in terms of being a valid member of the illiterati, he is that.
Yeah, but then again, no science fiction author will ever be considered, or in any time soon, will be considered a valid member of the literati. We're just not there, you know. We're still the genre is still secondary to everything else, I think.
You think so? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm jaded or whatnot, but I would put Vonnegut in that category, and Asimov too.
Mm-hmm.
But Asimov is more of a hard fiction writer, though, isn't he? He kind of, I mean, he has deep philosophy, but at the same time, it was grounded in kind of this rule, science-based literature or writing.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that that's not me dissing them. I don't think literary culture has given genre writers their due yet. So I didn't know that Bradbury was given the Medal of Freedom, and I'm glad to hear it because that recognition is much needed.
And his death was noted by President Obama too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he made a point to make a message about that death. And I can imagine, you know, anybody gets that kind of honor at the moment they die, you know, that the president of the United States says, hey, this guy died. We need to stop and pay our respects for him.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But I mean, that says something to Bradbury's career that was so big, and he was a relevant writer for so long. And, you know, as a science fiction writer myself, he's the kind of person I look up to and that I see as the touchstone for, is this good science fiction? And do I grapple with the kind of things that someone like Bradbury would grapple with?
Which is interesting too, because if you think about it, what he did to establish himself, you know, I guess in the 50s, it was a little bit easier to be kind of that pulpy science fiction author. But in later years, I mean, he was on TV, on the radio, in the movies. I mean, you would go to a Ray Bradbury movie. And even, you know, leading up into the 80s, I mean, he kind of never went away because you could, you know, flip on the TV and watch Fahrenheit 451, which was, you know, nominated. It was in some kind of Academy Award, Arts and Letters Award. I mean, he's constantly creating content based on, people were creating content based on his content, which as writers, that's kind of the dream, isn't it? You write a story, somebody else goes, wow, I want to invest millions of dollars to tell this story in a different way.
Totally.
Forever.
Absolutely agree. That's the dream. That's the lottery win.
Yeah, and people do it. I mean, look at one of my favorite authors nowadays, Andy Weir. I mean, he wrote one novel and, you know, got to meet, what's the guy's name? Aliens. The guy who directed Alien. People are like, they're screaming it out right now. Who knows? What is it? How do you forget this guy's name? Ridley Scott. His name is Ridley Scott. You know, I mean, that's an impressive thing to have happened for your first novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's why I'm my hero.
And just so your listeners know, I'm taking calls on this. So anybody wanting to adapt Brendan's way to screen is more than welcome.
Could you give it up? Could you say, okay, here's my book. Go ahead, make this however you want? Because, man, Hollywood has a reputation for screwing things up, right? I mean, they don't do anything by the numbers.
And I mean, when I look at what I've seen of the screen versions of Bradbury, yeah, that's definitely that's a concern. But it turns out I have a price. So if the check was big enough, I could move on and write my next book. You know, that's how I have. A writer's got to eat too. So yeah. It's okay. I'll take the hit.
Are you working on anything else now? I think I remember you saying that you had something in the pipe.
Yeah, I started another science fiction novel a couple of years ago almost. And the publisher, Bundoran Press, that published Brendan's Way, has already expressed interest in picking this up. So the problem is it's not done. So I'm feverishly working to finish the thing. And as my editor has said, books sometimes arrive on their own schedule, and that's definitely what's going on with this one. So I'm working on it, but hopefully maybe this year, maybe next year, it'll be in print as well.
And obviously, Ray Bradbury is not going to be producing any new stuff. You can visit his library, though. It's in California.
Yeah, that's on my list, I'll tell you.
Where is it, though? I was just reading.
Is it not in Hollywood or in the Hollywood area?
I don't know. I was just looking at it. And now my brain doesn't want to pull it out. It starts with an M, I think. It's not Los Angeles. Let's see, isn't it
Oh, okay.
death? Let me just find it, and then obviously you have the Fahrenheit 450. I wonder who gets that money. He had 4 kids.
Yeah,
I don't know
his
who they
estate.
are.
Sure.
I wonder how much money he had when he died.
I imagine he was pretty comfortable. He had so many properties out there. Once you get a book into like high schools across the continent, you're doing okay. The royalties probably kept him well fed.
That's interesting. His personal library was willed to the Waukegan Public Library, which is in Wisconsin.
Huh.
And he was born in Waukegan. No, I'm sorry, not Wisconsin, Illinois. So you're somewhere close. You can go.
I might have to do
now.
that. I wish I made
Jump on a bus.
Halfway there.
Let's see how close Detroit is from Waukegan. I don't know. But yeah, 4 kids, Fahrenheit 451 net worth. That's what we want to look at too. How much he was worth when he died. $30 million.
I believe it.
That's pretty significant.
That's okay.
2012. I mean, that's selling stuff. That's a guy. I mean, how much is Asimov? Asimov wasn't worth that much.
Wasn't as popular, I suspect.
No, that's wrong. His 1987 Isaac Asimov. The name Isaac Asimov is worth $87 million.
Whoa. Okay. Consider me corrected.
You know, some of these guys, they're going to live forever, and whether the literati want to accept it or not. I mean, Heinlein, who we had a really great conversation about, Bradbury, you know, this is also a really great conversation, and you know, Asimov, who maybe you can join me again and talk about him.
Yeah.
But you know, they are going to live forever on the same level of Shakespeare in 300, 400 years. I think. I mean, they're just never going to go away.
I think so. I think that, and I think it speaks to how science fiction grapples with the kind of questions that Shakespeare is grappling with that go to the core of the human condition.
Can you think of anybody in a modern context that's going to live like that forever?
I can't, and
Right.
part of it is because it's so hard to see. You know, it's easier from a distance. It's much more difficult, you know, from the present day. My money has been on Thomas Pynchon winning the Nobel Prize for some time, and Pynchon is the kind of guy who I think has an effective way of expressing how confusing and unrelenting modern society is with us. So that's the one guy that I say has the chance to live for a while, but he's also kind of inaccessible. So, and I don't know if I'm right on that one, but I don't see a lot of stuff, a lot of literature being lauded that really has the staying power that that guys like Asimov and Bradbury have.
It's interesting. I'm looking up Pynchon's career right now, seeing if I've read any of his books, and I have not. So maybe I should. Which one? Oh, V? Is that V like the TV series in the 80s?
No, no. V is about the Nazi rocket program.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up 2 books of his. That one is Gravity's Rainbow is about the Nazi rockets. V, I actually haven't read V. It's one of the few of his that I haven't read. But
according to Wikipedia, it describes the exploits of a discharged U.S. Navy sailor named Benny Profane, reconnecting in New York with a group of pseudo-bohemian artists and hangers-on. So it's a post-war story.
And Pynchon was very much a war veteran. You know, he was very affected by it. But you know, he's one of those guys to me that he's bigger than his time. But I don't know a lot of authors, and I'll tell you, I don't read enough, and I don't read enough science fiction. I do what I can. You know, I'm only one man, but I don't see anybody in science fiction with the scope and the clarity that people like Bradbury and Asimov brought to the table. And if I could be wrong, I could be missing somebody, and I hope I am, and I hope I find them. But they were so different from what we get from the sort of focused and narrow view of our own time. These guys saw things in a bigger way. And for Bradbury, a guy who finished high school and was not an academic, was not some kind of self-professed genius, to be so amazingly prescient and see things in such clear lines is really something. And that's why I was really interested in talking to you about him, because he is bigger than I think a lot of the writers that we read.
I mean, is this a kind of a Mozart situation? Is he a genius, or was he just in the right place at the right time?
Oh,
You know what I mean?
to the extent that I agree with the idea of genius, Bradbury absolutely qualifies for me. This guy brought something to the table, and I think if you're renting typewriters for 10 cents an hour,
You
you're
got some
not.
dedication.
Yeah,
Nine
that's not.
dollars and eighty cents in 1953 money is a flippin' fortune.
Absolutely, and that's like a week's or a couple days paycheck at the very least. And I think if you're doing that, you're not a man of your times. You're shaping the times. You're putting something out there that the Times doesn't yet have. So I think he was bigger than he was a genius. He wasn't a product of his time. He was shaping the time, and he was reacting to the time.
He ended up shaping the time. That's
Yeah,
absolutely, I agree with you there.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story, the Ray Bradbury story. I mean, speculating on what he's done for the genre of speculative fiction is just immense. I mean, you can't say speculative fiction without mentioning him.
for sure.
Have we missed anything on Mr. Bradbury? Do you think we should cover anything else?
You know, the only other thing I would say is that the Illustrated Man, if you, I think I said before, but I just want to reiterate, if there's a way, if you're interested in Bradbury, the Illustrated Man is such an enjoyable collection of short stories. And if you don't like the one you're reading, go on to the next one. You know, it's a short story collection in that way. And there's a narrative frame for it, that it's there's a guy with like these sort of supernatural tattoos put on him by a time traveling woman, I think. But the stories are so good, and they're very well worth like just get into them and just immerse, because that's a great collection of short stories. But the other thing I would say is, if you're a writer, go read some things that Ray Bradbury said about writing and feel like the little amateur peasant that you are, because I know that when I read what Bradbury says to his writing about writing and then to writers, it reminds me how much I need to do, how hard I have to work yet. And I feel that I've had a little bit of success. I feel that I put myself out there. I do work on my fiction, but I am nowhere near Bradbury, and that's the guy I want to be. So
Yeah,
he's a real hero to me.
I was going to ask you. I mean, should a writer read Ray Bradbury? And you answered that very well. Yes, they should.
It teach you more than just the writing, but I think even reading his stories and his novels, you learn about how good stories are put together. That's something important too.
I finish, Origin with asking an author what they would give, advice-wise to somebody struggling or whatever. And I happened upon a quote of his, and he said, just jump off the cliff. You know what I mean? I mean, that's basically the quote, was just jump off the cliff. And sometimes it kind of feels like that, where you get to a point in the story where like, crap, I need to write something. How do I do this? You just have to jump off the cliff.
I totally agree. And so easy not to. It's so easy to be safe. And I admire Bradbury.
We're scared, right? I mean, gravity is at the end of the gravity is death.
That's right. That's right. Or maybe you have wings. So it's worth jumping off that cliff and seeing what happens. I totally agree, and I think that's excellent advice to any writer.
My go-to throughout my what's that?
And if you don't know where that cliff is, go find it. Go find a cliff. Jump hard.
My thing for my life has been always, leap and the net will catch you, basically. Just do it, and whatever happens. It won't kill you necessarily, and it won't matter at the end of the day, because we all end up in the same place.
That's right. That's right.
Or whatever.
It's worth hearing that. I think it's worth considering that as an artist, that it's now is the time, and whatever time you hear this, now is the time. Get going, get working, put it out there. So I agree with you totally.
And this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and joining me today and doing some Bradbury discussion.
My pleasure.
And, I hope to do it again.
Yeah, for sure.